Hey BJ Clean Team, it's Ryan. Welcome to my channel. This channel is all things aviation, and I use my experience as a former F-15E combat fighter pilot, F-16 Thunderbird pilot, and current commercial pilot to break down aviation videos, stories, and current events. And stay to the very end of this video because I'm going to talk about what I think is going on in the current Ukraine situation, the case of the missing Russian Air Force, and how I think Ukraine continues to persevere through such adversity. Before we get going though, if you would, just dominate that like button for me and maybe even subscribe. Here we go. So in the newest Top Gun 2 trailer, you can see a Su-57 flying past Maverick and Rooster in their F-14. Is that symbolic? You bet it is. I think the entire world is like, Russia, bro. And what we're seeing is a case of the missing Russian Air Force. And there's been articles published about that. But the reason why I don't think we're seeing a lot of fixed wing activity from Russia is because they are a paper tiger when it comes to their Air Force. To me, it's kind of like the mafia got an Air Force. Like with the mafia, with their hitmen, they want them to look tough. They want them to look strong. But they're not going through training. They're not like, hey, Johnny, you're going to go through 4 weeks of hitman training. Get on it. No, they're like, dude, we want you to look tough and we want you to intimidate people. That's what I think Russia thought their Air Force was more for like a deterrence type force and not a force that can actually take action. And to back that up, intelligence sources have said that Russian fighter pilots are getting 8 or less hours of flight time per month. So that's crazy to me to think of getting around 100 hours of flight time per year. For me personally, when I was a fighter pilot, especially preparing for combat, if I was getting less than like 600 hours of flight time a year, I'd be like, man, I really need to fly more because it comes down to being very familiar with your jet. That is super important, especially when you get into a combat scenario, because when you get in that combat scenario, you fall back on your training. I mean, there's so many different situations that you're probably not prepared for in combat situations. But if you've flown a lot and you've trained a lot, you know that jet, you know how to max perform it, you know how to keep yourself and your wingmen alive. And in Russia's case, they just can't do that. Additionally, I think Russia's probably fearing red on red concerns. So they turn a fighter pilot loose with a whole bunch of bombs and they don't really have a lot of training and they don't really know how to talk to JTACs, Joint Terminal Air Controllers. Those are the people that we would talk to in combat to make sure that we were deconflicted from friendly forces and we were actually targeting the enemy and not the good guys. I think Russia's smart enough to know, like, probably not going to make that one work. So you could actually do more harm than good. So we're just going to keep you at home. And then it's worth noting too that Russian fighter pilots are very heavily GCI controlled, and that's ground controlled intercept. So ground-based radars will scan the airspace and essentially tell Russian pilots where to go. It's kind of like this.
All right, we want you to go straight. Yep. Okay. You got a group to target 50 miles in front of you. All right. No, turn left. Turn right. Turn left. Turn right. Jump. Okay. Descend. All right. Turn left. Jump. Go right. There. Okay. Come back. Shoot. Oh, you missed them. All right. You know what? Just go home. You know, this is over. Thanks for playing, but this is done.
So for ground controlled intercept, it's essentially a way for ground radars to tell you what to target. And if you don't have a lot of time in an aircraft, it's probably really nice to just sort of fall back and do exactly what you're told. But when it comes to ground targeting and a ground offensive, that's not going to be as effective. And those pilots are essentially going to be lost without those ground control intercept radars telling them where to go. And then at the end of the day, I mean, I'm just trying to keep it real here. I think the morale of the Russian troops is extremely low. And as aviators, as fighter pilots, something that we get high morale from is being extremely well prepared for combat. I mean, it makes you feel like your boss cares about your safety, cares about your well-being, and wants you to come home from combat. And something that I saw from some of the best leaders is they got us some incredible training opportunities prior to going into combat. And honestly, that helped build and instill trust a lot more than someone who would be like, we're going to get you 8 flight hours a year. Yeah, you're probably not going to make it back. Good luck. And again, I think this whole situation is a failure of leadership and kind of getting into a little bit of the why. It's probably a little vague to the aviators and fighter pilots themselves as to why they're even being sent on any of these missions. I mean, when I think about the overarching strategy for Ukraine from those at the top in Russia. To me, it seems centered on the fact that Ukraine has essentially $2 trillion in oil and gas reserves. There is not like this big mission that they're actually trying to accomplish. It's more of a power grab. And I think if you're smart, and aviators usually are, that you just understand that this is a mission that doesn't make a lot of sense. And luckily, the failure of leadership on the Russian side is countered by excellent leadership on the Ukrainian side by President Zelensky. It's been really awesome to see him step up. He's definitely the man for the job, and it seems that he was born for this. So I think if there's any leader that can get Ukraine through this, it's Zelensky. So what can we do as the West? Well, what my fighter pilot brain tells me is there's a lot that we can do. And obviously we're sending weapons, which I think is a great thing. To give you a quick update on that, there's been requests from Ukraine for us to send them Patriot missile batteries. This is tricky for a few different reasons, which I'll tell you about right now. So the Patriot missile is obviously a complex machine to operate, but it's also highly classified. So think about the Patriot like an F-22. We didn't export any F-22s because we didn't want that air superiority technology to be leaked out or to fall into the wrong hands, just like we wouldn't want a Patriot missile battery system to fall into the wrong hands. In addition to that, it takes about 90 US soldiers to operate a Patriot missile battery. So there's a lot of logistics involved. But we've taken a really smart approach. Just recently, Slovakia has decided to send their S-300 surface-to-air missiles to Ukraine. I think they only have a couple of them, but hey, every little bit helps. So they're sending that firepower to Ukraine. The US is actually moving Patriot missile batteries with US troops into Slovakia to beef up their defenses. So I think this is a very creative way for us to create a de facto no-fly zone, which isn't like the traditional bring in hundreds of aircraft, tankers, the mass no-fly zone. This is a de facto no-fly zone, which I think is really smart. So I think this is how the Ukrainians win. They start to shoot down these aircraft with this de facto no-fly zone, and the West continues to help them bolster up that no-fly zone. It's a non-traditional way to create a no-fly zone, and it's something that I think could really turn the tide in Ukraine. And it's worth noting there's already a relatively good network of anti-aircraft weaponry in Ukraine. So if we bolster that up, I think we're on the right path. And some have called for Poland to send MiG-29s into Ukraine, and then the US would backfill F-16s into Ukraine. Obviously, Ukraine has experience with the MiG-29, but at the end of the day, I think it's a really hard thing to do as far as spinning up pilots, even if it's a different model of MiG-29. I mean, in the US, when we go from like a Block 50 to a Block 52 Viper, there's things that are involved. There's training that's involved. And training in that environment is probably going to be very difficult. So I think at this point, an even better option would be contract pilots. I'd do it. Now, I don't think that we'll actually send contracted fighter pilots in to fight that battle. But at the end of the day, I think there are smarter solutions than sending in the MiG-29s. And the whole point too is to prevent World War III. So obviously we want to make sure that this is a proportional response. And that's something that I hope that we continue to focus on as a nation is, hey, Russia, if you're going to fly your jets into Ukraine, we're going to shoot your jets down. That's just how it's going to happen. That's our proportional response. So you take that action, there is a consequence. But at the end of the day, we have to prevent World War III. And I think the best way to do that is to focus on a proportional response. So to summarize, I will just say that I think this is everyone's fight. It's really cool to see basically the entire world standing up against evil and saying this is wrong and actually taking action to help bring this to an end as fast as possible. And that's something that I would do when I would climb up into a fighter jet cockpit, whether it was for training or for combat, is I would do my best to meet evil with strength in a proportional way. So glad you guys are here to see this video. Please go ahead and dominate that like button for me. Maybe even subscribe. I'm excited you're here. Hit me up on the @BJetClean Instagram as well. Most of all, have a great day.